So welcome. This is a Zoom meeting that I'm going to try to share some of the wonderful old stories I've heard over the years as town historian. I used to, when I used to write for the newspaper years and eons and ages ago, people would call in and tell me all kinds of stories, and they'd send me out to look for information on things that they'd heard. And over the years, I was fortunate enough to hear some real whoppers and some kind of spooky stories, and I thought I'd just relate the ones I've learned to you. One came to me by way of a book I found in an antiques mall. It was called Witch Trot Land. Can you see the screen at all, Allison, of the shared screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So this book really was the story of a pastor that started preaching in Maine in the 1600s in Falmouth. And his congregation kind of fell away when there was some fallout between the Native Americans and the settlers, and the town of Falmouth was destroyed. So he decided by invitation he was going to go down to Salem, Massachusetts and be their pastor. They offered him that they told him they would build him a house and they would pay him a salary. But unfortunately, his name was George Burrows, and unfortunately when he got to Salem, they had built him a house, but they refused to pay him a salary. And it got so bad that, in fact, when his wife passed away, he had to borrow money from a neighbor just to bury her. So there were a lot of hard feelings between he and his congregation, and
Kathy, I'm sorry, you got muted.
Am I back?
You're back. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Trying to give me a sign, are you? So anyway, this George Burrows was the pastor down in Salem for quite a while, but he ruffled some feathers, and after a time of not being paid, he decided to move back to Maine. He first came back to Portland, and then he ended up being the pastor in Wells, of which Kennebunk was a part. Time went on, and about 9 years later, the Salem frenzy started, and two girls in Salem told their elders that they had visions of Reverend Burrows and had dreamt that he had murdered his wife. So, being the times that they were, the powers that be in Salem sent out a marshal to collect Reverend Burrows from Maine. And this was in 1692. So when they got here to Maine, of course, they were afraid of, this fellow, if he's a witch, how are they going to get him back to Salem? But they put him in manacles and put him on the back of a horse and started on their way. And Reverend Burrows is rumored to have told them about a handy shortcut through the woods. Well, what happened was, according to legend, is that the skies started getting darker, the heavens opened up, and hail started coming down, lightning started toppling trees all around them. And so, of course, they immediately thought that this was the work of the devil. And of course, George Burrows must be a conjurer of the devil. So sadly for Mr. Burrows, he ended up being hung as part of the Salem witch trials. And he is buried in Salem to this day. He was hung August 19th, 1692. And he was really a man from Maine. So you don't think that we're involved in the witch trials, very, that's kind of abstract, but it came as far as our community as well. And a century later, it got really close to our community when a fellow in Arundel thought that his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Smith, was a witch. This gentleman by the last name of Hilton lived over in Cleves Cove, and while walking his oxen team down the road one day, Mrs. Smith went past him and he lost control of his oxen. And of course, being whoever he was, he thought that that was due to witchcraft. Boy, it didn't take much to make him believe, did it? So he got it in his mind that he convinced his entire family, the whole neighborhood, that this old lady was a witch. And it got so bad that at one point, Mr. Hilton tried to strangle her and beat her with a stick. Finally, she was saved, and it came before the judge in Biddeford, Judge Wells, and he basically said that all the troubles in the neighborhood were due to ignorance, and that Mr. Hilton and his family were going to have to pay a $100 fine, and it would be held in bail until they controlled themselves and made peace with Mrs. Smith, who was not a witch. This was an interesting story, this next one. When I was writing for the paper, I had a person email me and ask me if I knew about the witch's grave on C Road. And I had never heard of it. So they told me that down on C Road, there's a cemetery, which there is, close to the ocean on Matticat Lane. And they said that there at one time was this gravestone there that had the devil on it. Well, I was friends with Roger Gonville for a number of years, and Roger was a very wonderful historian and a very detail-oriented historian. And I talked to Roger about it to find out what the story was, because it seems that every spring, all of these occurrences were happening at this gravestone. Witch wannabes, as I call them, would gather and dance and have rituals and all kinds of things around this gravestone. And it was, I guess, that it was getting a little out of hand. So when I talked to Roger, he had already done some research on it, and what it turns out to have been was not a devil's image at all, but a gargoyle's image. And the backstory on this was that the people who placed this marker there actually had a child who was mentally challenged or physically challenged in some way. And in the Victorian era, that was very misunderstood, as it is sometimes today. And when the child died young, they placed this marker on the grave because in the Victorian era, gargoyles were meant to be protectors of the souls who have passed. And so over the years, in 1994, thereabouts, this stone disappeared. I don't know that if it went to somebody's, lawn as a garden ornament, but or maybe perhaps the family decided to remove it to kind of lessen the likelihood of the witch wannabes coming back every year. But in looking at this stone, I kind of think that it probably was the base of a bigger stone similar to these, because it just makes sense with the size of it that it was probably carved as a funeral urn, and this was the base. But sad to say, it is now gone and never to be seen again. Roger Gonville, the historian, was kind enough never to share the name of the family, and it was not, he said, to protect the living, or excuse me, the dead, but to protect the living instead. Everyone knows this home, and I don't know if everyone knows the story of this home, but it used to be believed that this home in the upper, which is of course the Wedding Cake House on Summer Street, it was rumored that this house had a ghost that would appear in the top window wearing a wedding gown. And she was supposed to be the wife of the ship captain that lived there long ago, who waited in that window for him to return, but he never did. The problem with that story is it's total bunk. It's not true. It was developed at about the same time as the invention of the automobile and postcards. And so on early postcards, they fabricated this story to make it more of a tourist attraction. The ironic thing about this house is that many people, including former owners, have said that it actually is haunted, but not by a a woman in a wedding dress, but of none other than George Bourne himself. George is the fellow on the right. George built this house and made all of the decorations and trim work by hand out of wood, and he made them to look like the cathedrals that he had seen in Milan. And George died very young in life, probably in his 30s or 40s. But as the house passed through successive generations, it came to be that folks seemed to think that George was still around. In fact, when one of the two previous owners was living there, they used to go out into the barn, and every time they went into the barn, things would start flying off the wall, and clatters and clangs and all kinds of noises could be heard. And in fact, when they went to sell the house, the lady, the owner of the house, went into the barn with the realtor, and the commotion started. Yeah, things started falling down off of walls, noises, bangs, all sorts of things. So the owner of the house finally had had enough, and she told me she finally just had to say, "George, shut the heck up and go away." And apparently he did. And I don't know, and according to the last owners, he hasn't been seen since. So turns out it may have been haunted after all. Most people, going on to the next one, most people have heard about the three ghosts of the Kenebunk Inn. The Kenebunk Inn was built about 1799. Looked nothing like it does now. It was just built as a home. But in a number of years after that, in the 1920s, in fact, it was turned into a tavern for travelers. And in the 1940s, it was enlarged to the 22 rooms that it has now. And it seems that in the 1940s, when all of the renovations took place, that's when the ghostly activities started. One gentleman was out on the porch one evening, according to a desk clerk, and came running in from the porch and said, "I know what I've seen. I know what I've seen." And when asked further what he was talking about, he said that when he was outside, he glanced up at the window and saw a man dressed in Victorian clothing looking down at him from the second floor. Other things that have happened there that have been reported are there's a bar in the back of the building, and mugs and tankards would come flying off the wall, and on one occasion hit one of the bartenders in the back of the head. I guess the ghost didn't care for the guy very much, maybe. And people, when they go there, seem to feel the most activity, for whatever reason, in room number 17. They feel cold chills there. Some people who profess to be mediums have come through the inn and immediately stated that they feel the inn is haunted. The three ghosts are supposedly a gentleman by the name of Silas Perkins, and another fellow who was, let's see what he was, Cyrus, another gentleman named Cyrus, who was former night clerk. And another ghost said to be there is of a little girl named Emily. Many people claim to have seen shadows of a man standing in the back stairway of the inn, and they believe that it to be either Cyrus or Silas. Cyrus, I'm told, was a poet, and he actually died in room 17, which is maybe why they feel that is the most haunted room of all. Let's see, this is a picture of Andrew Walker, who was a town historian. A lot of people say he was a consummate busybody. He kept I'm back. It says I'm muted. Hold on. Alt-A.
We can hear you, Kathy. We could. Now you're muted.
Not sure why that's happening. Is it back?
You are back. Yep.
Okay. So this is a photo that's supposed to represent a time when the entire country was caught up in what was called the spiritualism movement. People were literally popping out of the woodwork claiming to be clairvoyant and mediums, and they could talk to the dead. And it came to our town in about 1854 when this gentleman, Andrew Walker, wrote about it in his diary. There was a ship captain called Nason who firmly believed that he could talk to his dead wife. And others in the neighborhood of the Summer Street also believed that they could talk to their past loved ones. Now, not like today when if you go to see a medium today, it's more of a conversation. And in those days, it was basically you would go and you would be asked questions, yes or no, and the table would be rapped on a number of times. Oh, I can hear somebody. So anyway, the answer to questions would be given in a number of different tappings on the tables, and the tables would move, and people really got caught up in it. And at one point, there were supposed to be 2 seances per week, and at least 20 people in the town of Kennebunk who believed that they were truly mediums and could talk to the dead. And it wasn't until, there's still some of this going on, but it wasn't really until the 1890s when, and early 1900s, when it started to be, many of them started to be debunked and proven to be frauds and hoaxers. In fact, Houdini was one of the prime people who tried to debunk most of these spiritualists and prove them to be frauds. Every time let's see if I can get to the next screen. When I get muted, it doesn't let me go to the next screen too easily, so hang on. Hold on. Let's see if it makes it go. There it goes. All right, so why is there a picture? It's to his feet. Allison, we've got somebody who's not muted.
Yeah, can't see who it is. If you're not muted, would you please mute yourself?
Thanks. Picture of a shoe. Why is there a picture of a shoe? This is a house on Main Street, really on Portland Road, right across from the Unitarian Church. Was renovated a number of years ago, and here's a picture of the house. And it was pretty much gutted, and in gutting it, the shoe was found in the fireplace when it had been put there as the house was built. And it was believed, this happens quite often, people find colonial era shoes in fireplaces when they're remodeling homes. And it was put there under the belief that it would either bring good luck to the people who lived in the house, or the more popular belief was that witches would be drawn into the chimney by the smell of the shoe and would never be able to escape because, of course, witches can't fly backwards. This is the house that I'm referring to. It's what I call the Rice House, and this house has a bit of a story to tell as well. I have a friend who wrote a book called Dear Helen, and it was the story of Helen Richards and her beau, who was John Quincy Adams Ford, the gentleman on the right. Now, I don't know, you can't really see with all the people there, but there's a picture on the right, and that is of John Quincy's mother, Pauline, and John Quincy as a child. And apparently what happened is John Quincy Adams went to war in the Civil War, and he served there till the end of the war. And his mother did not like Helen at all, did not like the relationship, did not want him to marry her for whatever reasons. And so when he got out of the war, she sent him off immediately to Rensselaer Polytechnic School in New York. And he stayed there yet another 4 years until he graduated. Upon coming back to Kennebunk, she forbid them to get married, and they would write love letters back and forth and be, get together when they could, but then the mother would intervene and put a kibosh to it. So that's what my friend Laura's story was about. And so when this house was being remodeled, we got the opportunity to go in, and it was, taken down to the studs on the first floor, but we were able to go up to the second floor. And when we went into the front bedroom, Laura said, I feel this creepy heaviness in this room. And both of us felt an icy chill. And the minute we stepped into the room, the door slammed behind us. So I gotta say, that's probably one of the closest, occurrences I've had with spirits and so forth. And my friend Laura, at that slamming of the door, she said, Pauline knows I'm a relative and doesn't want us here. Well, look at that face. Don't think I can understand why. This next story is about a house on the corner of Sea Road and Summer Street. It's recently been sold, and it used to have a barn out back. The barn has long been torn down. There's a picture. I don't know if I can move that photo over. Maybe I can move me over. Nope. Yeah, there. Okay, the photo of the gentleman up on the right is a man by the name of Dr. Sweat. Dr. Sweat put it out to the community that he was a health physician and regular MD. And unfortunately, later on, it was found out that he had no medical training whatsoever. And the most he had of experience was that he had trained under his father as a veterinarian, but he was by no means a medical doctor.
Wants to find that woman.
And so in 1860,
he purchased a turntable and 3 records for.
Sorry, I could still hear somebody in the background there, not muted. So in 1866, the town bells pealed and everybody was abuzz about what had happened. And well, apparently the doctor was a bit of a womanizer and a raging alcoholic. And his wife, Jane, was getting pretty tired of his antics, I suppose. And he came home on that day, and she instructed her young daughter to go out into the barn and get the whiskey bottle that her father was hiding in the barn. So the daughter dutifully did what her mother asked, and she went out to the barn and collected the whiskey bottle and brought it back into the house. And there Jane poured the contents of an envelope filled with morphine. And when the good doctor came stumbling in and collapsed on the couch, she panicked and called neighbors. She apparently gave him way too much morphine. And the neighbors came, but they simply passed it off as, oh, he must be drunk again, and didn't call for any help. But within the hour, Dr. Sweat was dead. He came out at the trial that he had been having an affair with another woman and was constantly drunk and beating his wife, and et cetera, et cetera. But nonetheless, Jane was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in jail. The funny thing is when she got out of jail and came back to Kennebunk, she stayed out her time at what was known as the Poor Farm and lived out her days there until she passed away. And ironically, we don't know that if the house is haunted. Some people say they still can see shadows of Dr. Sweat there from time to time. But what's even more haunting is the fact that Jane was buried next to her dead husband so that she could probably haunt him for eternity. Let's see, these are just a few other recognizable homes in our area in Kennebunk and Kennebunk Port that are rumored to be haunted. We have the Clock Farm down in near Goose Rocks Beach is supposedly haunted by a little girl named Josephine who likes to leave her footprints on the wet floors and likes to hide the silverware. The other yellow house is that on North Street in Kennebunk Port, and that is the what's called Blueberry Hill. It is owned by Jane Morgan, the actress, and her brother. And Jane always claimed that was a ghost of a Civil War soldier there and the ghost of a Quaker woman. And the two ghosts apparently never got along. So there were a lot of slamming doors going on in that house. The top photo is a picture of what's called Spy Haven. It's on the River Road in Arundel. And that was owned by a man named McCullough, who was a Tory, AKA didn't believe in the revolution and believed in wanted the English to win the war. So he built a secret wall in his home, and that's where he would hide British soldiers. And that it is rumored that now and again in that secret hiding spot, if it still exists, or when the story was told, you could hear rapping from inside the door, and no one would be there. So seems to be a lot of places that have stories of ghosts. I think there's at least a dozen inns in Kennebunkport that talk of ghosts, their inns being haunted as well. And I don't know if it's true or if it's just for, to get more people to come. My final and favorite one is of my own house. When I first moved here to Kennebunk, I lived on Pleasant Street. This is an old picture of Pleasant Street taken about 1905. And the third house on the right that you can just catch a glimpse of was my house. And at the time, I had two little girls, one of which was a baby. And it was a great house, but every single night when I would sit on the couch, I could hear footsteps on the stairway behind me every single night. And it just got to be common, oh, yep, there goes the ghost. You can hear the footsteps stomping up the steps every single night. But one day when I was home and I'd put the baby down to sleep in her crib, I heard the front door open and somebody ran up the stairs. I panicked. I totally panicked. I ran to the stairs. I ran upstairs and into my daughter's room, and nobody was there. But I knew what I heard. I knew somebody had come in the door and run up the stairs. So I ran to the back and I checked the back stairway, and no one was there. And to this day, I know what I heard, but could not see anybody. So years later, within the last few years, while doing research on various things that I do, I read an article that in 1899, there was a hitching post out in the front of that very same house that was buried into the ground 2 feet, and for no reason at all, flew out of the ground and landed across the street at a neighbor's. So that was my justification that something was really amiss at number 10 Pleasant Street. So don't know if it's true or not. Like most of these stories, we can never know that they're true, and we can't frighten the living into believing they're true. But if you've ever heard a ghost or seen a ghost, I guess that you'd be the judge of that. And that's all I have for tonight.
We do have a comment. It says, what about Wallingford Hall?
Wallingford Hall has been known is purportedly haunted by a little girl who may be the daughter, Abigail Wallingford, who has been seen in the yard. I guess nobody knows why. And there's also reported that in the barn they have seen shadows of Revolutionary War soldiers. I know that they've conducted some what's called EVM monitorings there, but I don't know what has become of, what the results of those were. And that's basically where they take a recorder and they go into the basement and they record but then play it back later, and things that they didn't hear can be picked up on the recording. But I'd like to know what came of that.
There's another one that says, I heard Brown Street is haunted.
All of Brown Street? Don't know. Wouldn't be surprised.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, well, we have recorded this. It's going to be posted on our YouTube channel. You can get to that just by going to our website, and there's a little icon up in the top right-hand corner. And if you weren't here right at the beginning, we are doing a presentation. Kathy's going to be speaking on November 23rd about the Kenjoy historical photos.
Great, thanks everyone.